So tonight I watched two films that I rented from Videodrome on Saturday, and then I somehow didn't watch a single movie all week. I was just too tired and doing a lot of work, and didn't get any movies watched until tonight, where I was watching the movies because they're due tomorrow. And what I've been doing mostly with renting from Videodrome this year is I'm tracking down films that have been on my list for a while, and I'm just getting them off the list. So these were two films that I had heard of when I did A Year with Women, but they were not streaming at the time, or maybe they were for rent but like Amazon Rent, and I wasn't really doing much of that. I'm not really sure why I didn't watch them during that year, but they come up a lot, and I felt like I needed to finally see them in order to be a legitimate person. So the first one is Joyce Chopra's 1985 film Smooth Talk. It stars Laura Dern and Treat Williams, and it's based on a short story by Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce Carol Oates' story was written in the 60s. This film takes place in the 80s, and it's an interesting sort of mesh of the rise of mall culture with a very intense look at the dangers of adolescence for teenage girls, specifically because the way in which girls, when they become women in our culture, become all about their body, and the way in which men ogle their body, the way in which men perceive them because of their body, and the way in which they are taught to value themselves based on their body. And so it starts out as sort of a coming of age teen summer movie and winds up something much deeper and much darker and much weightier and scarier and wonderful. And the end sequence with her dancing to a James Taylor song is just as eerie as that Zodiac end with Donovan. It is fantastic. So don't read about this movie. Don't look anything up. Don't look at the summaries. Just go in and experience it because it's so good, and it's one of those films that so perfectly sets up its first half that when the tonal shift happens, it's like, oh my God, yes, I see why the first half was the way it was in order to get to this very terrifying ending. And what's so wonderful about it is that I was reading some people who didn't quite like the ending, and I think they maybe misunderstood what the ending was supposed to represent, because this character goes through a lot, and thankfully off screen, and then her ability to compartmentalize it, or her desire to compartmentalize it and move on, she isn't really moving on, and that's what's the point, is that you are affected by these incidents, and you are who you were, and then you are who you are, and it stays with you and it lingers, but you still live in your life. And I think Chopra and Dern are able to really bring that feeling and that idea and that reality to life in this film. Treat Williams plays the terrifying stalker type person who shows up in the first half, and then you see who he really is in the second half. And he's terrifying, but also really hot. And so you see why someone naive and not quite understanding what's happening would get into kind of situation that she's in, because these kind of men are can be very charming, and that's how they prey on women. So he's one of the best sleazebags I think of all time in this film. So good. So this is Smooth Talk from 1985. I rented it. It was in the right aspect ratio on the DVD, so that was fantastic. The other film I watched was not in the right aspect ratio, and this is Daisy von Scherler Mayer's Party Girl, starring Parker Posey. It's a very iconic film. It's notable for a couple of reasons. One, I just looked up Daisy von Schleiermeyer. Schleiermeyer. She directed a film I watched during Year with Women called Woo, with Jada Pinkett that I really did not care for. A very similar film about a party girl, but I didn't really care for that film. Her grandfather co-founded the WGA and wrote films such as Merrily We Go to Hell and To Be or Not to Be, so I didn't know that. Her co-writer, Harry Brickmeyer, also worked on Paris is Burning, so you can see sort of why they would write this story about party culture and rave culture in New York. They came from this. Well, I don't know about Meyer, but definitely Brickmeyer. And the story follows Mary, a 23-year-old, about to be 24-year-old woman who is sort of listless in life. She doesn't know what she wants to be. She's graduated from college. She has no skills. She has no ambition. She throws parties to pay her rent. When she gets arrested for one of these parties, she calls her godmother to get bailed out and then begs her to let her work in the library with her. And that's where she finds her calling. And then there's some like B stories where she's trying to flirt with a Lebanese falafel vendor who also happens to be a teacher who's trying to raise money to bring his family over. And I think the film works. The rom-com elements of the film, I think, really work. And the party elements, clearly, the screenwriters, know this culture really well. But somehow I felt like the film felt very disjointed and never quite meshed as well as it could have. And none of the characters ever quite felt real. But it never felt far enough away from reality to be just its own reality, and it didn't feel real enough to be real. And so that was an issue. I also am not a big fan of party culture and people who just like Holly-go-lightly themselves through life. I'm not a fan of that. So films about that don't quite ever work for me. That said, Paris is Burning, which is a documentary about ball culture, I really, really dig, and can understand the people presented in that film way better than basically a privileged white girl in New York who is just floating through life. I don't find anything to grasp to in that. I don't find any deep insight into human nature. I don't find anything from those kind of stories. So I was a little disappointed in this film. But anyways, this is Party Girl from 1995. Smooth Talk is from 1985. You can rent both of them. The disc I got for Party Girl was in full screen. I hate that. I was going to say it's notable as being the first film to be streamed in its entirety online. It was an online stunt in 1985 as part of the Seattle International Film Festival. You can look up that history. So it's got that notoriety. And it also launched Parker Posey as a lead actress and not just supporting. She is quite good, and it uses her energy well. I just don't think the film is completely baked. There's a cat behind me. So these are my films for this today. You can rent them. I'm going to go to sleep now. It's almost midnight. Have a good night.